As a student at David Lipscomb High School and editor of the Pony Express, which was the student newspaper. And I was editor the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. And as soon as we realized that he was deceased, I called my journalism staff together, my newspaper staff together, and made assignments to cover the student reaction to his death. And long story short, that was on I think a Thursday, and on the next Wednesday we came out with a special edition, which received a lot of national acclaim. Was noticed by John Siegenthaler, who was the editor of the Nashville Tennessean at the time. And I graduated in June, started my college work at Lipscomb, then college, now university. And within a few weeks, got a call from the Tennessean wanting to Miss Bradley, who was in the journalism advisor at the college, looking for a student who'd be interested in working 20 hours a week. And she referred me, and Siegenthaler remembered the special edition when I interviewed, and I was hired to work 20 hours a week, and for the rest of my college career worked 60 hours a week at the Nashville Tennessean. I didn't go to college much. I eked out my college career, and I loved working at the newspaper. And literally I would leave here at the end of the day, which was 2, 3, 4 o'clock, and go straight to the newspaper, work until midnight, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, skip my morning classes and start over. And I didn't skip that many, but I did skip a few. And a couple of times we had chapel speakers who were of newsworthiness, and I would always have my pad with me, and I would take notes, and I would leave chapel and go to the paper and write the story, and it was just a great time. But I missed a lot of college working that much, but I loved the newspaper. Well, my first front page byline was, I'd been at the paper only a few days, and I was assigned a story that would have been assigned to a cub reporter. Some dead dogs were found under a bridge in North Nashville, and they were beginning to offend the neighborhood, the odor, and I was assigned to go out in the neighborhood and find out what was going on. And long story short, the city refuse department was picking up deceased dogs that had been hit along roadsides across the city, and they were taking them. They didn't want to go all the way to the dump, which was a lot further than this bridge in North Nashville. So they were dumping them under this bridge until they had an accumulation, then they go back and pick them all up and take one trip out to the dump. And it was really it was a horrible story in terms of abusing a neighborhood and not doing their job, and a health hazard. I mean, it had all kinds of bad things about it. And so I dug to the bottom of that and did the story and embarrassed the city and the department, and got my first front page byline. A few weeks after that, I was in chapel, and there was speculation at the time about whether then Governor Frank Clement was going to run for Senate against Howard Baker. And the governor had been playing really coy about it. And he got up in chapel with a profound introduction from then President Athens Clay Puyas, and he kind of loosened up, and he got up and he said, if this weren't a nonpartisan Christian school, I'd announce for office right now. And so I quoted him word for word and called my editor as soon as I left chapel, and he said, come on in and write the story. So I rushed down to the newspaper and wrote the story. At the same time I'm rushing the newspaper, Clement's rushing to the airport to get on a plane to Memphis. He lands in Memphis. My story has already been written and put on the Associated Press wire, and beats him to Memphis. And so all the reporters in Memphis meet him at the airport and say, Governor, you're quoted as saying that you would have announced for office today if you'd been in a different environment. And he claimed I was misquoted, that he was misquoted, that I had misquoted him. And So my editor calls me and says, Tom, the governor says you misquoted him. Well, you can imagine, how frightening that was. You've been on the job 3 or 4 weeks and the governor of the state's accusing you of misquoting him. And I found out, though, that all chapel programs were recorded just as practice. And so I got a copy of the recording, and my quote was word for word exactly what he had said. So the next morning, the Tennessean, which was not a big fan of Governor Clements, had a front page story with a picture of the governor saying I was misquoted and a picture of me saying tape proves reporter correct. And that was my first big break. After that, there are lots of stories, but I covered Howard Baker's first Senate campaign. I covered Richard Nixon's campaign. Covered multiple national political conventions. I did a lot of civil rights reporting and social welfare reporting because I eventually got my degree in social work, and that's where my real interest was. And I guess one of the other stories I'd remember, without boring you, there was I actually had a case I was working while I was going to social work school. Involving this family that was just, the father was in jail, the mother was in prison, the mother was in and out of jail, there was an older daughter who was trying to take care of 3 or 4 kids. It was just horrible. And they had rented this place over in East Nashville where literally you could not, it was not habitable. It was absolutely filthy. And you literally could not stand at the bathroom sink because there was a hole in the subfloor where you could see all the way down to the ground. And so you had to stand back from the sink or on the side of the sink to even use the sink, which was filthy and not usable anyway. And so I wrote a story about the slum conditions, and the landlord, who then was known for properties all over Nashville that he was renting for $25 a week or whatever it was. These people thinking they're getting a deal because it's $25 a week. Well, it adds up, to $125 a month or whatever it was. And so I wrote that series, and then I ended up, the child in this family, the infant in this family, ended up getting into the Drano under the kitchen sink and to his death. And I ended up writing a story about that. And all of that made me think I was going to made my decision about leaving social work and going to the newspaper, where I felt like I could impact lives like that more than I could as a social worker. Well, the transition from social work to the Tennessean was pretty easy. The Tennessean was a liberal, Democrat, advocacy newspaper, a great newspaper back then, one of the best in the country. And John Siegenthaler was one of the best newspapermen in the country. And to be able to work with him and the staff he put together and learn from that group of people was just an incredibly valuable experience. I didn't plan the transition to politics. That just happened. I had been at the Tennessean for 7 years, and Attorney Stevens, who's now a professor here in the business school, and I had known each other from high school, and he had the idea of starting Nashville Magazine, and which he did, and asked me to be the editor. And so I took a leave of absence from the Tennessean to be the first editor of Nashville Magazine. And I didn't like being an editor particularly. I'd rather be a reporter. And I didn't like magazines versus newspapers. This spring you were planning next spring so that you could get next spring's pictures this spring. And this Christmas you were planning next Christmas. It didn't work for me very well. So Lamar Alexander, who I'd met when I was covering Howard Baker's campaign, he was a staffer for Baker, asked me several times to go to Washington with Baker, then subsequently with Nixon. I didn't go with Baker because I was still in college and wanted to finish up here. I didn't go with Nixon because I didn't particularly like Nixon, even before it was obvious he was a bad guy. And But then Lamar decided to run for governor himself in 1974, and I had been at the magazine for a year. We had reached our goals of 10,000 circulation and so forth. And I said, and so I agreed to be his press secretary that year, and that's how I became associated with politics, with Republican politics, really through Lamar, and everything I've done since then has really been, most of everything I've done politically since then has been a function of my relationship with Lamar. I had and have great respect for Lamar Alexander. I think he is the kind of person we all should want in politics, and I love working with him and for him and what he stands for. I'm not wild about politics otherwise. I've ended up doing a lot of it. That's probably what I'm better known for. But for instance, right now I've got 40 plus clients, and only 3 of them are political. And most of them are corporate. So I'm known for the politics, but I spend much more time advising corporate clients right now. The politics, some of it I enjoy, some of it I don't enjoy. I enjoy it when it's with a really good person like Lamar. I'd put Bob Corker in that category. I've done other campaigns, Bill Haslam I'd put in that category. Other campaigns I've done, I'm not as wild about. Well, it's interesting really because a lot of people, I had been Lamar's chief of staff and deputy to the governor from the time he became governor in 1979 until he was reelected in '82, and I was still his deputy and chief of staff at the beginning of '83 when he took office for the second term. And I told him early on I didn't want to stay forever. I'd seen too many people stay around the hill too long and become hacks, and I didn't want to do that. Plus, it was a very tough job being deputy and chief of staff, and I was kind of burned out. And so I began thinking about what I wanted to do, and I had some friends who advised me and who actually advised me to take a yellow legal pad and write on it what I thought were strengths and weaknesses, and then what I'd really like to do with my life, and see where all that led me. And it led me to a conclusion on that yellow legal pad that if I could do exactly what I wanted to do, I'd put up a door somewhere and put a sign on it that said crisis manager, problem solver. And then I said to these 4 friends of mine who were helping me that, that's what I'd really like to do, but I don't think anybody will pay me for it. And 3 of them said they would. And they owned Corrections Corporation of America. They owned J.C. Bradford, which was in the largest regional brokerage firm. And one of them, the Dive-In Mall, which was a public relations firm that was trying to hire me, said they'd hire me as a consultant instead. And Eric Erickson Advertising, which was trying to hire me, said they'd hire me as a consultant instead. So I started with those 4 clients. And as I look back on it, the Ingram has been very good business ever since 1983, and then we've opened the Washington office, which does business as the first group, and it's a really, really good and fun business with lots of great clients. But as I look back on it, a lot of people would look at these businesses and say, oh, you did that because you were in politics. I really did that because I was in media. I mean, the grounding and the lessons I learned with John Siegenthaler and a lot of great people at the Tennessean really are what my business is more about today than the politics. I don't demean the politics or devalue it because it certainly was valuable, and the relationship with Lamar is certainly valuable, but it's really that training I got as a journalist, I think, that allows me to go into any situation quickly, scope it out, think about concisely, describing it or defining it, and advising a client, how to solve a problem or how to take advantage of an opportunity, and that's what our business is about. Well, the lessons I learned as a journalist, when I became a journalist, I had led a pretty sheltered life. I was pretty shy. I was not a bold person. And what I learned in journalism was, one, not to be intimidated by anything or anybody. I could have on my jeans and a knit shirt and a jacket and go into any meeting I wanted to if everybody was in formals. And as a reporter, you just do that kind of thing. Some of them take it to extremes, but you truly are the fourth estate. And so I learned not to be intimidated. I learned to go into any situation. And then what I think really served me well, though, frankly, was the lessons I learned on the high school newspaper and in English classes. To be able to just take a look at relatively objective, although none of us truly are objective. We all look at it through our lens. But take a fair look at whatever the situation was, pretty quickly distill and digest it, and then be able to write it in a very concise and clear and brief way. And so I give a lot of credit to people like Denny Lloyd, who used to teach here. He taught me for 3 years, English 3 years at Lipscomb High School. Was my faculty advisor on the newspaper when I proposed doing the Kennedy special. He didn't have a clue how we'd pay for it. It wasn't in the budget. He said, "Go do it. We'll figure that out later." He encouraged us at a high school level to be professionals, to be serious about what we were doing. And if you look back at the Pony Express in those days, we were addressing city issues. We were pondering national and international issues, and we were as serious as we could be as high school students in a sheltered environment. But all of those are lessons that I take away from it. I really almost mourn the world of journalism, because I think that what I grew up in with two very active newspapers, three very active news departments and TV stations, a number of freelancers in radio and TV. When I covered the legislature, for instance, for the Nashville Banner for a couple of years. After Lamar lost in '74, I actually worked 2 years for the Banner, which was the evening newspaper then. I had 4 or 5 reporters and a couple of photographers with me on the Hill all day long. That was one newspaper. There are barely that many reporters on the Hill today for all the newspapers. So we've lost that. We've lost locally owned media, which almost all of those were then, to national chain media. We've seen a reduction in media. We don't have the competition we used to have. We've seen a reduction in the news forces at what we have left. We've seen a reduction in the news whole, or time that they allow for news. And I just think that there's not the time or space or experience anymore developed to really cover the news the way it used to be covered. I was talking to somebody the other day. I try to read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal every day. I don't spend much time with local newspapers anymore. I try to watch PBS or listen to NPR. I don't spend much time with local news on TV or radio much anymore, because it doesn't tell me much. It shows me fires and wrecks and shootings. It doesn't tell me what's really going on in my community. And so I really think the state of journalism is in a big hurt right now, and I don't know what turns it around, because we've lost so much of the foundation. I was in a meeting just recently where we were talking about leaders across the state, and we looked at a long list, and there was one person from media on the list, John Siegenthaler, who's retired from media, who hadn't been at a real newspaper for years. And there was nobody else. And we went through the people who could be on it, but they're not really leaders in the state anymore. Where 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would have had the editors of all the major newspapers, you'd have had half a dozen TV executives from across the state. You'd have had 10, 12, 15 people on that state leadership list from media. Now you got one. And I don't think anybody else would come up with a much different list. Well, I don't. When I think of newspapers today, I think of the print version. I think of the online version. And I mean, when I say I read the Times and the Wall Street Journal, some mornings, if I'm in a hotel where they give out one of those, I read the print copy. If not, I'm checking it on my computer. I'll look at the Hill newspapers, Washington Hill newspapers, the Hill Roll Call or Politico, which frankly, which have print versions, but they're probably more online presences than they are print presences. Are newspapers a dying breed? Certainly the print versions are less in demand, but the function of delivering news, newspaper style, whether it's online or in print version, I don't think is dying. I mean, you've got everything from community newspapers like The Scene here, Metro Pulse in Knoxville, and you've got Chattanooga online in Chattanooga. I mean, you've got print and online local media. I mean, very local community media. You've got you still have a daily paper in each of Tennessee's major cities, and with online versions. You still got the local TV news and some radio news, though not much. And but I think a lot of that is being subjugated to massive access to massive amounts of information over multiple cable and other TV outlets, posing as news. I don't think most of what you see on TV, I think at best is infotainment. It's not real news. There are exceptions to that. I mean, McNeil-Lehrer Hour, or the News Hour they call it now. Some of these shows, 60 Minutes, CBS Sunday Morning, which I think is one of the best of all news magazines, still give you really good, deep, penetrating, hard-hitting, if necessary, news or information. But so I don't think it's dying, and I think will always be an audience that will want that. Unfortunately, I think the larger audience, and maybe this was always true, the larger audience is going to go to the comics or the sports page or Entertainment Tonight or something soft that's not very informative. So I think it's hurting. I don't think it's dying. And I don't think it will die. I think there will always be an audience for good, solid information and news. I hope there will be. Well, I don't discourage it at all. And one of the things I enjoy most is there's several really good young journalists here in Nashville. Brian Reisinger at the Business Journal, Gordon Gee, who was at the Tennessean, Chaz Sisk at the Tennessean. There's some older ones like Bob Mueller at Channel 2 who are still good, solid journalists. And, I'd rather sit around with them at night and talk about news and what's going on in the world than do about anything else in the world. So I encourage people to go into journalism, but with their eyes open. I mean, it's a tough business. You're not going to get rich in it. Unless you're the exceptional person who, ends up some national venue. But, I hope if that happens, you're a David Broder or a David Brooks and not a screaming Chris Matthews or something else. And Chris Matthews, I think, by the way, has been a good journalist in his past and still shows moments of good journalism, but I think TV drives this it's ratings driven, and so even the good ones become screamers. Morning Joe, I thought that when that started that Mika and Joe were really contributing to journalism. Now they just yell at each other. And so I quit watching it. Charlie Rose on CBS in the morning. he's a great journalist. He's a great interviewer. I hope he stays that way. I hope it doesn't drive him to just become another entertainer. So I would encourage people to go into journalism, but I would really hope that they'd stay true to it. Wherever level they reach, whatever level they reach, I would hope they go into it with their eyes open. Though it's a tough business, and you're not going to get rich, and it's going to be hard. I left journalism sort of by fluke, not by design. And for years, I dreamed of going back into it. But I've kind of decided now, you know, I'll relish the things I learned, and I'll enjoy the memories. But I don't think I could go back into it because I think it's changed so much. But I hope that everybody's not that cynical and will still continue pursuing that career and trying to make the best of it. Because I think it's so important. I mean, I used to have on my wall a quote from Thomas Jefferson that said, if I had to choose between government or newspapers, I should not prefer to choose the latter, or should not hesitate to choose the latter, because even as a president, he recognized that the value of that fourth estate, looking over everybody's shoulder, keeping everybody honest. Journalism wasn't always pretty then either, but it was a very important function in American life, and I think any culture's life. I think that there was nothing that I've ever done that was as fulfilling or interesting or in which I learned more than I did my 9-10 years in journalism. Still consider myself a journalist when people allow it, and still love to write. Still love to look at things as a journalist and try to figure them out and think about writing about them. It's a great profession and a great career that's gone through a lot of changes, but I hope somebody figures out how to turn it and salvage it and make something really important out of it for at least the rest of my life and the rest of my kids' lives.